Richard Staller-Scholk and Luisa Fernanda Valdez Morales. And I believe she's tuning in from Mexico, Luisa. And Rich is tuning in from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we will be saying a bit more about them in a few moments. But there's also another very important person with us tonight. I'd like to introduce to you Natasha Elena Ullman, and she's going to serve as interpreter for Luisa's presentation. The evening will be in English, and Rich will be offering his presentation in English. But Luisa is going to speak in Spanish, her native tongue, and Natasha will be doing consecutive translation. So Luisa will speak in chunks, and Natasha will in Spanish, and Natasha will give it in English. During the question period, where we hope to have a robust conversation, we ask you at any time during the presentation to note down in the chat any questions that you have for our two presenters. And then when that time comes, Rebecca will be fielding those questions. She will collate them and present them to our speakers. So that's how our evening's going to go. We're going to have Luisa speak, then Richard speak, and then discussion. And so I do want to give you a heads up about our other upcoming events. So our February, March, April, and May, we have some really exciting events coming. You are all on the mailing list, or will be after this evening. And so many of you have received the whole rundown of the series, but let me just say that we will be talking in February about Guatemalan indigenous movements. In March, immigration in the southern border. In April, we'll be talking about Chile today, 50 years since the coup in Chile. And as our last one, it will be talking about extractive industry and environmental and human rights in Latin America, more specifically in Central America. So that's our series for the year, and we're excited about it, and we hope that you will continue to join us and bring more people. So with that, let's get tonight started with Mexican labor and autonomous movements. I'm going to introduce Richard Staller-Scholk to you, who will be our second presenter, and then turn it over to Jen to introduce our first speaker. So if you signed up for tonight, which you all have, you've already read the information about Rich Staller-Scholk and about his scholarship and about his research. And he is recently a professor emerita of political science, Latin American political science from Eastern Michigan University. And he has many publications and wonderful scholarly work. But for me, who has worked alongside him for many years in solidarity work, he is the most important thing about him for me in this context is that he is a rare breed of someone who is an excellent, prolific scholar and an activist who cares enough about what he is researching and learning about and teaching about to also act on it and be in solidarity movements with those that he's researching. So that's a great compliment that I want to offer to Rich and what I'd like to share with you. And I will just, yeah, so that's Rich Staller-Schulk. And if Jennifer could please introduce Luisa.
Yes, thank you, Marianne, so much. Yes, we are lucky to have with us tonight Luisa Fernanda Valdez Morales, and she is an organizer for the Comité Frontera Obreras. She is an internationalist and political scientist. She studied international relations and political science, and her graduate work was in public administration and public policy. She was raised by her mom, a pastry chef, and her father, a union member. She's currently a coordinator of union projects for the Border Committee of Workers, and she is committed to the mission of achieving a dignified and fair life for all workers in the maquilas on the northern border of Mexico. Thank you for being with us, Luisa.
Muchas gracias. No sé si mi audio está mejor ahora.
Sí.
Sí, gracias.
Súper. Entonces, voy a comenzar. Voy a compartir la pantalla porque tengo una presentación para que puedan todos verla.
Thank you so much. I'll start by sharing my screen so everyone can take a look at my presentation.
¿Se puede ver? Súper. Bueno, como ya lo dijo Jennifer, yo soy parte del Comité Fronterizo de Obreras y voy a orientar esta presentación para hablar sobre los esfuerzos en el acompañamiento del proceso de sindicalización independiente en la frontera norte de México.
As Jennifer said, I'm part of the Border Committee of Workers, and this presentation will talk about the Mexican independent labor movement along the border of Mexico.
Brevemente, el contenido de la presentación. Quiero dar un pequeño contexto sobre la organización y el trabajo que hace la organización a la que en este momento estoy representando. Y bueno, posteriormente hablaremos sobre las campañas del sindicalismo independiente que la organización está acompañando en este momento y por último unas reflexiones finales.
Briefly, the content is, I want to give a bit of context about the work we do at Border Committee of Workers. We'll talk about independent union campaigns we're assisting, and then some final reflections.
El Comité Fronterizo de Obreros es una organización sin fines de lucro de base que está conformada por trabajadores de la industria maquiladora en 5 ciudades que están al norte de México y que colindan con la frontera con Estados Unidos. Y esta organización pues se dedica a defender y promover los derechos humanos laborales de los trabajadores en la maquila para que de esta forma puedan tener una vida digna y un trabajo justo.
The Border Committee of Workers is a nonprofit base-building organization made up of maquilladora workers in 5 cities at the north of Mexico along the U.S.-Mexico border. We defend and promote workers' rights in maquilas so they can have a fair work and a dignified life.
Y como cualquier esfuerzo, todos los trabajos y actividades que se hacen en beneficio de las personas trabajadoras de las maquiladoras son en conjunto con otros aliados y amistades que ha hecho la organización a lo largo de los años. Algunos están aquí presentes en esta reunión y algunos otros pues son aliados que cooperan para poder mejorar las condiciones de las personas trabajadoras.
As with any movement, the work we do in support of maquiladora workers is alongside other allied organizations we've worked with throughout the years. Some of you are here tonight. Others are allies who work alongside us to improve working conditions.
Y bueno, el Comité Fronterizo de Obreros tiene 3 proyectos, no nada más los proyectos orientados al sindicalismo independiente, trabajan también con el género y el empoderamiento de la mujer, la educación y la capacitación a los trabajadores sobre sus derechos humanos laborales y por último, claro, el proyecto de sindicalización independiente.
The Border Committee of Workers has 3 projects, not just the independent union movement, but gender and women's empowerment, worker education on their labor rights, and the independent union movement.
Y en este punto me gustaría mencionar que estos 3 proyectos están interconectados porque son regularmente mujeres trabajadoras las que lideran las campañas del sindicalismo independiente. Entonces, mientras se capacitan y se forman en cuanto a derechos humanos laborales, también son líderes de sus comunidades y líderes en las maquilas.
I'd like to mention that these projects are interconnected. It's often women workers who lead the independent labor movement. And so as they're learning about their labor rights, they are at the same time leaders of their communities and often of the maquilas.
Y bueno, sobre el proyecto de sindicalización independiente en coordinación con otros aliados, como los mencionamos anteriormente, se trabaja para que los trabajadores tengan las capacidades suficientes para conseguir un sindicato independiente que realmente los represente y gracias al trabajo de campo que constantemente hacen las demás personas organizando y acompañando las campañas de la organización, pues se busca que las empresas respeten los derechos humanos laborales y puedan dar condiciones dignas de trabajo a estas personas.
In terms of the independent union movement, alongside the other allies we mentioned before, we work so that workers have the training and skills they need to build an independent union that truly represents them in their interest. We're working so that companies respect working conditions and that these jobs are jobs with dignity.
Y de manera muy breve para entender cuál es el reto en la consecución de un sindicalismo independiente. El sindicalismo en México también, quizás un poco más tarde que a nivel global, pero alcanzó o empezó a emerger a finales de 1850, 1860, con algunas huelgas en estados como Puebla, Chihuahua, Hidalgo y Cananea, que son las más sonadas.
So a brief timeline of sort of the context and what we're fighting for. The labor movement in Mexico kind of began to emerge in late 1850s or 60s with strikes in some states like Chihuahua and Hidalgo, among others.
Posteriormente, con la dictadura de Porfirio Díaz, estos movimientos empiezan a ser reprimidos. Sin embargo, bueno, todo esto también se ve impulsado por el crecimiento económico, la revolución industrial, la inversión extranjera en México. Y sin embargo, estos movimientos empiezan a ser reprimidos, pero a la par van surgiendo ideas políticas como las de los hermanos Flores Magón, que dejan ver una oportunidad diferente para poder defender los derechos laborales.
Afterwards, with the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, these movements began to be repressed. So first, this kind of like labor organizing was impulsed by foreign investment and domestic growth. But yeah, so they come to be repressed under the Diaz dictatorship. But at the same time, we start to see ideas like with the Flores Magón brothers who had a different vision where workers' rights are really respected.
también cabe mencionar que en este momento en que las ideas empiezan a surgir, los medios jugaron un papel muy importante en la transmisión de ideas entre las personas trabajadoras que, si bien no todas tenían acceso a los periódicos y muchas personas trabajadoras obreras eran analfabetas, fue esta la mejor forma de poder comenzar a circular las ideas eh, sobre los derechos laborales.
In this movement, at this point in time, as these ideas are surging, the press played a really important role in their proliferation. Working people didn't always have access to the press, you know, they couldn't always read, but still these ideas began to circulate through these mediums, and kind of pro-worker ideas began to grow and gain traction.
Posteriormente, con la Revolución Mexicana, empiezan a surgir ideas sobre el sindicalismo y sobre la colectividad en los trabajadores y los obreros, y nacen confederaciones como la CTM, la CROM, los sindicatos de los mineros y los electricistas, que tenían una naturaleza para defender a los trabajadores. Esa era su naturaleza inicial, defender a los trabajadores y generar colectividad.
Afterwards, throughout the Mexican Revolution, we see ideas about kind of the union movement and collective workers movements. We start to see the emergence of confederations like CTM, the Mineros Union, and Electricians Union, and they really sought to kind of defend workers and build collective power.
Sin embargo, con la Segunda Guerra en el contexto global y el cambio en el modelo económico mexicano, la industrialización y el siguiente proceso, el siguiente paso que México debía dar, requería que en México no hubiera ningún levantamiento obrero ni ninguna idea contraria al gobierno para que pudiera haber estabilidad económica. Y es aquí cuando los sindicatos y las confederaciones que inicialmente habían nacido para crear colectividad entre los obreros cambiaron y se volvieron en favor de las corporaciones y del gobierno.
However, throughout the Second World War, and through changes in Mexico's economic model and development, in Mexico, there was kind of less of a tolerance for kind of an improvement in workers' rights or anti-government resistance. So these confederations and workers' groups changed, and they grew to be aligned with the corporations and the government.
Y por muchos años estas confederaciones y estos sindicatos sirvieron nada más a las empresas, a los patrones y a los intereses del gobierno, que también está conectado con la hegemonía del partido del PRI, que estuvo en el gobierno y en la presidencia por más de 60 años. Entonces eso también impactó en cómo los sindicatos y las confederaciones de obreros fueron absorbidas por el gobierno y dejaron de representar los intereses de los trabajadores.
For many years, these confederations and unions really just existed to serve bosses and corporate and governmental interests. The PRI, Mexico's political party, which ruled over Mexico for over 60 years, you know, this kind of long run also shaped how unions and workers' confederations, you know, they came to be absorbed by the government, and they just stopped representing worker interests.
Sin embargo, la transición política y partidista en México dio paso y dio oportunidad a un hito histórico que ha sido la plataforma para poder mover hacia adelante, y en 2019 se dio la reforma laboral, con la que también que a la par estuvo impulsada también y creó sinergia con la negociación del Tratado de Libre Comercio entre Estados Unidos, México y Canadá.
Okay. However, throughout the period of political transition and transformation in Mexico, there came to be like a historic movement. In 2019, we saw labor reforms that were advanced in part through negotiations, free commerce arrangements between Mexico, Canada, and the US.
Y con esto como breve contexto, actualmente, bueno, desde el 2019 con esta reforma, los trabajadores tienen, entre muchas otras cosas, la oportunidad de buscar una representación auténtica y un sindicato independiente. Sin embargo, es una lucha constante porque todo este sistema que se trae arrastrando desde 1950, 1960, pues es algo difícil de romper. Entonces, los sindicatos charros, como ahora se conocen, pues son la antítesis de los sindicatos independientes que realmente representen a los trabajadores.
As a result, since 2019, through these reforms, workers have, now the chance to seek genuine representation through independent unions. However, it is kind of an ongoing struggle because the system, dates back to the 50s and 60s, so it's hard to just fully break away from it. So the charro unions, as they're known, they're come to be the antithesis of the independent unions that truly represent and fight for workers.
Y bueno, en este sentido, el Comité Fronterizo de Obreros, dentro del proyecto sindical, acompaña 3 campañas que a continuación voy a presentar, empezando por la campaña de Delta Staff Manufacturing en Torreón. Es una maquila que produce para marcas como Levi's y Gap, confecciona prendas y bueno, no tenían un sindicato auténtico, ahí los estaba representando la CROM, pero realmente jamás vio por los trabajadores y en el 2022 empezó un proceso de acompañamiento a una campaña sindical, empezando a formar comités con los trabajadores y a través del trabajo de campo que la organización hace, se empezó a generar una base de contactos para pues ir esparciendo la idea de la libertad sindical y poder buscar una opción diferente a la CROM.
So in this sense, the Border Committee of Workers works on kind of three main campaigns we'll talk about today. I'll start with the Delta Manufacturing. It's a maquila that produces products for Levi's and Gap, mostly clothing. They didn't have authentic union representation. They were represented by GRON, which never really fought for workers. In 2022, we assisted them to create worker committees and kind of start building a base for workers who were willing to explore the possibility of an alternative of an org that would really represent them.
Lo que se hace en el trabajo de campo, en la organización, pues es ir a cada casa de cada trabajador y estos domicilios se van consiguiendo entre los trabajadores que van señalando sus contactos de confianza para que puedan recibir también esta información. Y así es como se va construyendo el mapa de los trabajadores a los que constantemente se les visita, no solo para llevar la idea del sindicalismo independiente, sino también para saber cuáles son sus condiciones de trabajo y cómo es el trato dentro de la maquila.
So we go from home to home visiting workers, and start to create a web of, workers, like who trusts who, to just kind of map out, like, just an overall web of workers. And we go not just to talk about the independent union movement, but also to learn about their working conditions and how they're treated in the maquilas.
Posteriormente, en el 2023, en esta campaña que se desarrolla en Torreón, hubo varios procesos que fueron encaminando los esfuerzos de los trabajadores para exigir mejores condiciones y en mayo del año pasado hicieron un paro para exigir un incremento en las utilidades porque en el 2023 los trabajadores de Delta Staff Manufacturing en Torreón recibieron desde 50 centavos hasta 50 pesos por utilidades.
Perdón, para traducir, ¿me puedes explicarlo de utilidades?
Sí, es el porcentaje de dinero que les toca a los trabajadores de las ganancias obtenidas de la empresa por el año anterior de trabajo.
Gracias. In 2023, throughout this campaign in Torreon, workers began to kind of expect more and fight for more and demanding better conditions. So in May of 2023, they demanded an increase in kind of the profit sharing, which was 50 cents. So
Con este paro, la empresa se vio presionada y lo que hizo fue regalarles, porque así se manejó, regalarles un bono de 500 pesos a los trabajadores para que volvieran a sus áreas a producir. Eh, y posteriormente, la organización mantiene comunicación constante con los representantes de las marcas para poder ir monitoreando la situación de las personas trabajadoras al interior de la maquila y constantemente están haciendo visitas y auditorías a las maquilas.
the company felt the pressure and gave them a bonus of 500 pesos so the workers would get back to work. But since then, the org maintains current contact with brand representatives and is monitoring the situation on working conditions, visiting and auditing the maquilas.
Y bueno, todas estas irregularidades se dieron en un año en el que estaba previsto que los trabajadores tuvieran la oportunidad de votar por la legitimación del contrato colectivo que les representaba, porque muchas maquilas tenían un contrato colectivo de protección con estos sindicatos charros. Entonces, en el caso de Torreón, tenían un contrato colectivo con la CROM, que realmente era un contrato sin ninguna prestación por encima de la ley, era casi todo apegado a la ley, y realmente los beneficiados pues eran los representantes de la CROM. Entonces, en julio del 2014 se llevó a cabo la votación para la legitimación del contrato colectivo y aquí los trabajadores podían decidir si querían seguir con ese contrato colectivo o no querían seguir con ese contrato colectivo y buscar la negociación de uno nuevo.
So workers then had the chance to vote to see if they wanted to maintain their current contract. Lots of maquillas have contracts with the charro unions, which sort of failed to fight for workers. At Torreon, they had one with La Cron, which was a contract that really didn't do much. The beneficiaries were really the union reps. So in July, the workers were able to vote for whether they wanted to keep it or negotiate for a new one.
Sin embargo, vale la pena mencionar de parte del contexto de esta campaña, en esta maquila en Torreón existe mucha rotación de personal. Las personas están constantemente entrando y saliendo, cambiando de trabajo, entonces realmente no hay una verdadera identidad que pueda permitirles conformar un comité para formar un sindicato independiente, además de que las condiciones de la ubicación son diferentes y no permiten que la gente sienta confianza de poder compartir más contactos. Además de que en esta planta también existe mucha represión por parte del patrón y uno de los requisitos básicos para poder afiliar a un trabajador, pues es contar con el recibo de pago o la nómina, y en esta planta no se las proporcionan. Entonces tampoco es fácil crear un grupo unido ni un comité para formar un sindicato independiente.
However, it's worth mentioning in this maquilla in Torreón, there's sort of a revolving door of workers. You know, they really come and go. So it's hard to build a more longer term sense of worker identity and build an enduring committee for an independent union. Also, it's hard for workers to feel comfortable sharing other contacts in terms of mapping out the workplace. There's a lot of repression from the boss. And, one of the requirements for moving forward with the independent union is kind of collecting worker pay stubs to to map that out, which they don't receive here. So there are lots of hurdles to pursuing an independent union.
Con todo este contexto, en las votaciones ganó la CROM. Sin embargo, hubo muchas irregularidades porque en el padrón había muchas personas que no tenían por qué votar porque eran personal de confianza. Entonces, bueno, hubo demasiadas irregularidades durante la jornada electoral, por lo que la organización, después de la votación, se encargó de recoger algunos testimonios que dieran evidencia de todas estas malas prácticas y se interpuso un documento de no conformidad con los resultados ante el Centro de Conciliación y esto procedió porque obviamente no fue un proceso justo para el sindicato independiente y la votación se repitió. Sin embargo, reitero que en esta planta en Torreón existe mucha represión, mucha rotación de personal y a pesar de que hubo un segundo intento en este proceso de votación, la CROM volvió a ganar.
So Lacrom won. However, there were a lot of irregularities. Some workers spoke to, shady conditions and that it wasn't a fair vote. So there was an appeal, and the vote was repeated. However, due to repression and the revolving door, it still failed.
Aquí les voy a compartir una de las visitas que hicieron las marcas para que, como en esta planta en Torreón había muchos trabajadores eventuales que no tenían un contrato ni seguridad social, y eso no lo permiten las marcas y está fuera de la ley también, los escondieron a todos los trabajadores en bodegas durante horas, sin tener acceso al baño, sin tener acceso ni agua.
So I'll share something from one of the brand visits where the brand representatives came to check on conditions in Torreón. So the Maquila employed a lot of contingent workers who have no contract and no benefits, which the brands stand against. And so they were just hidden without access to a bathroom or water.
La siguiente campaña que el Comité Fronterizo de Obreros está acompañando es en Delta Staff Manufacturing, pero en la planta de Nazareno. Es la misma es la misma empresa, pero con una planta diferente. Nazareno es una comunidad rural que se encuentra en el estado de Durango, así que literalmente esta maquila, las instalaciones de esta maquila están en medio de la nada. Es una comunidad rural y están casi en medio de una parte semidesértica. Esta campaña empezó en febrero de 2022, cuando un grupo de trabajadoras empezaron a indagar sobre las condiciones que estaban viviendo dentro de la maquila, el salario bajo. Entonces se empezaron a organizar y la empresa las identificó y fueron despedidas.
So the next campaign that we are working alongside is Delta Staff Manufacturing, the Nazaron plant. It's the same company, but at a different plant. So at Nazaron, it's a rural community in Durango. This maquila is in the middle of nowhere. It's semi-deserted. So this campaign started in February 2022 when workers were talking about the poor working conditions they faced, low pay, etc. And they started organizing. And the company identified them and they were fired.
Sin embargo, la organización, el Comité Fronterizo de Obreros, tuvo contacto con los representantes de las marcas que ejercieron presión y se logró la reinstalación de las 4 trabajadoras un mes después. Y bueno, una de las particularidades es que en esta maquila no existía un contrato, no tenían un contrato colectivo con ningún sindicato. Sin embargo, cuando la empresa empezó a darse cuenta de que había un intento por formar un sindicato independiente, pues contrató prácticamente a la CTM para que fuera el sindicato que estuviera dentro de la empresa y creara como un contrato colectivo ficticio que no había hasta ese momento, para que no hubiera un sindicato independiente.
However, the Border Committee of Workers was in contact with the brands themselves, who pressured and successfully won the reinstatement of the four workers who had led the union efforts 1 month later. So at this maquila, workers didn't have a contract with any union. So when the company realized there were efforts to unionize, they basically contracted CTM, one of the charro unions, for them to be the union to represent workers, and create a contract that was in effect meaningless, just to ward off the entry of an independent union.
Y bueno, aquí lo que pasó fue que en enero un área dentro de la maquila que se llama el área de calidad eh, pidió un aumento de salario porque en enero del año pasado, como en enero de este año, el salario mínimo incrementó. Entonces, el salario de las personas que tenían el mínimo se emparejó casi con las personas que son de calidad, que regularmente tienen un salario mayor. Entonces, las personas trabajadoras hicieron un paro para poder exigir un incremento del salario y se dieron cuenta que a través de parar el trabajo y parar la producción era una forma muy efectiva de poder conseguir que la empresa escuchara sus demandas.
So in January in the maquila, the quality control section asked for a raise because in January of the year before, the minimum wage was raised. So the workers there who had made minimum wage began to make almost as much as quality control, who generally make more. So they were asking for a raise and realized that through work stoppages, by interrupting production, the company had to hear their demands.
Y al igual que en la planta de Torreón, aquí en Nazareno, en mayo también hubo un paro para demandar un incremento en las utilidades, porque también pues recibieron desde 1 peso hasta 50 pesos, que era lo más alto por utilidades, y al igual que en la otra planta, les regalaron 500 pesos para que volvieran a las actividades. Nada más que aquí, a diferencia de Torreón, dadas las condiciones contextuales del lugar, al ser una comunidad rural, existe un poco más de confianza y un poco más de colectividad entre las personas y es muy fácil llegar a la casa de un trabajador o una trabajadora y que te lleve con 3 o 4 amigas que también trabajan en la maquila. Entonces es mucho más fácil que se sientan identificados y que empiecen a tener que empiece a haber un enojo colectivo transformado en un esfuerzo por mejorar las condiciones.
So just like in Torreon, here in Nazareno, in May there was a fight for profit sharing, and they went from 1 peso to 50 pesos. And here again, they were kind of bought off with 500 pesos. That's what the company tried to do to get people to go back to work. But given the specificity of the location, since it's a rural community, people are kind of more ingrained, they think more collectively, they know each other. It's easier to visit a worker at home and go with them to see 3 or 4 friends. So there's more of a sense of solidarity and collective anger.
Y aquí en esta maquila, las votaciones también para legitimar el contrato colectivo fueron en julio y como aquí se pudo conformar un comité de trabajadores mucho más fuerte y con una visión más a largo plazo, ganaron el no en la legitimación en el mes de julio y entonces sacaron prácticamente a la CTM.
So here at this maquila, again, voting for a collective contract, the sort of false contract was in July. There was a much stronger worker committee here with a longer term vision. And so they won a no vote for the bad contract and basically got the charro union out.
Sin embargo, a pesar de la victoria y a pesar de demostrar que no querían a la CTM, tanto el patrón como la CTM se aferraron a seguir y buscaron también solicitar una constancia de representatividad. Entonces, en este momento, de hecho, estoy aquí en Torreón para ser parte del proceso de acompañamiento para la siguiente votación que va a ser el 23 de enero. Es la votación definitiva en donde los trabajadores van a poder elegir quién va a llevar el proceso de su negociación de un nuevo contrato colectivo de trabajo.
However, despite this victory and despite demonstrating that they didn't want CTM, the sort of corrupt union, the Boston CTM doubled down. They also made an appeal. So I'm currently here in Torreon to accompany workers to the next vote, which will be January 23rd, and it'll be the definitive vote on where workers will decide on their representation.
Aquí hay algunas fotos del día de la votación. Estos son los resultados. Realmente fueron muchos trabajadores los que dijeron que no querían a la CTM y a pesar de eso han tenido que enfrentar constantemente la represión por parte de la empresa porque las ha aislado de poder seguir compartiendo el mensaje por el sindicalismo independiente. Y también ha habido momentos en que la empresa ha favorecido a la CTM para que hagan sus labores sindicales dentro de del área de trabajo.
So here are some photos of the day of the vote. It was sort of a joyous thing. Workers said no to the CTM. And, you know, even though they've had to face constant repression from the company, which has kind of singled out workers and tried to stop them from sharing the independent union message, the company has also favored CTM-aligned workers in the workplace.
Y algo que me gustaría destacar de aquí es que el comité está conformado en su mayoría por mujeres. Muchas mujeres son madres, otras son mujeres jóvenes y algo muy interesante que es constantemente repetido por ellas es que esta lucha por buscar mejores condiciones de trabajo no es solo para ellas, sino también para sus hijos y sus nietos que seguramente van a trabajar en la maquila porque no hay otras fuentes de trabajo más que dedicarse a la crianza de animales o al campo en esta zona.
Something that I'd like to emphasize is that the committee is majority women. Many women, many of them are mothers, others are young women. But something that is kind of constantly repeating is that for them, this fight is not just about them, but their kids, their grandkids, who will, you know, very likely end up working in the maquila as well, down the line, because there aren't many jobs in the area other than some agricultural work.
Y bueno, finalmente la siguiente campaña que el Comité Fronterizo de Obreros acompañó y hasta la fecha sigue acompañando es la de BEU Manufacturing en Piedras Negras, también una empresa que se dedicaba a eh, a la manufactura de partes de autopartes, sobre todo las que tenían que ver con productos textiles. Y bueno, esta campaña empezó mucho antes que las otras dos, empezó en el 2021 y al igual que las otras, la sinergia comenzó porque querían buscar mejores condiciones de trabajo las personas en esta maquila. Y una de las diferencias que se notan hablando con trabajadores de una y otras de estas tres maquilas es que, por ejemplo, aquí en BU Manufacturing, todo lo que hacían durante toda su jornada de trabajo las mantenían de pie todo el tiempo. Y, por ejemplo, en el caso de Nazareno, sí tienen una silla, a pesar de que también son jornadas de muchas horas, sí tienen una silla.
Finally, the last campaign we've been focusing on is that of VU Manufacturing in Piedras Negras. It's a company dedicated to manufacturing auto parts. So this campaign started long before the other two. In 2021, just like the others, it began because workers wanted better working conditions at this maquila. And one of the differences between the maquilas is that here at VU Manufacturing, workers have to be standing the entire time. And even at Barcelona, at least they have a chair, even though the work is very, very involved still.
Y el trabajo de, el proceso de acompañamiento en cada una de las campañas comparte muchas similitudes. Se hace trabajo de campo, se visita a las personas trabajadoras en sus hogares y se va buscando crear una red de contactos. También uno de los objetivos del acompañamiento que da el Comité Fronterizo de Obreros es capacitarles durante este proceso de acompañamiento, pero también irles orientando para que tomen cierta autonomía dentro de sus propios comités y dentro de sus propias secciones sindicales.
So throughout these campaigns, there are a lot of similarities. Essential to the effort is fieldwork, visiting workers at their homes, building out a web of contacts. And something we really aim to do is train workers throughout this process so they can kind of be autonomous and, go on to organize workers on their own.
Y bueno, la campaña de BU enfrentó muchos obstáculos para poder avanzar. Aquí en esta campaña se presentaron dos veces quejas ante ante el mecanismo laboral de respuesta rápida del TEMEC. Una por la denegación de los derechos sindicales porque no les estaban reconociendo la oportunidad de conformar un sindicato. Aquí también le ganaron a la CTM y la CTM no tuvo ni oportunidad de poder solicitar un segundo recuento, así que directamente pasaron a la etapa de la negociación del contrato colectivo.
There were lots of obstacles in the VU campaign. Twice we presented complaints before the Labor Rapid Response Mechanism, a tool. One, because workers were not being given the chance to form a union. And here again, they beat CTM, which didn't even have the right to seek a second recount. So they went right into contract negotiations.
Sin embargo, a pesar de llegar a la etapa de la negociación del contrato colectivo, siguieron enfrentando muchos obstáculos por parte de la empresa, entonces se presentó una segunda queja ante el mecanismo laboral de respuesta rápida y derivado de esa queja se surgió un plan de remediación a 6 meses para que la empresa se comprometiera a reparar las fallas que estaba teniendo en favor de este sindicato independiente que se estaba conformando y que a pesar de todos sus esfuerzos no pudo lograr concretar ninguna negociación con con la empresa.
However, despite reaching the contract negotiation stage, there were still hurdles. So a second complaint was filed. And through that complaint, there was a remediation plan for the company to commit to, stop union busting. But despite these efforts, there just wasn't a contract was not achieved.
Y bueno, en cada momento la empresa demostró que estaba en contra de la sindicalización independiente, empezaron a cerrar algunas líneas de trabajo y finalmente en agosto cerraron sus puertas dejando a 70 trabajadores sin su liquidación.
Throughout, the company demonstrated that it was really opposed to the independent union movement. In August, they ultimately shut their doors, leaving 70 workers without work and without severance.
Y bueno, actualmente esta campaña, aunque la empresa ya cerró, a pesar de que al momento del cierre tenía el plan de remediación todavía vigente, no solo dejaron a 70 trabajadores sin liquidación, sino que también les imposibilitaron poder conseguir otro trabajo en alguna maquila en Piedras Negras. Empezaron una lista negra que fue circulada por la CTM, que era el sindicato que estaba ahí y perdió. Y gracias o debido a esta lista negra, hasta la fecha ha sido muy difícil que los trabajadores consigan un trabajo. Han tenido que entrar a a otros tipos de empleo, como en tiendas de autoservicio, en gasolineras, en tiendas comerciales. Entonces, lo que hizo el Comité Fronterizo de Obreros, monitoreando constantemente la situación de estas personas trabajadoras, fue identificar que en una de las maquilas, específicamente en Piedras Negras, que es Fujikura, les estaban negando directamente el acceso al trabajo por haber pertenecido a BU. Entonces se inició una queja contra Fujikura por la denegación de el acceso al trabajo por motivos sindicales.
Okay. Currently, this campaign is still in motion. Although the company shut down, they didn't just leave 70 workers without work and without severance, but they also blacklisted them from other maquilas in Piedras Negras. The blacklist was circulated by CTM, the charter union that lost. And as a result, it's been really hard for workers to find work in the area. They've had to kind of enter other industries, other areas, retail, etc. So we've been monitoring the situation and identified expressly that at one of the maquillas, Fujikura, workers were expressly denied employment there because they had worked at BU. So we have filed a complaint.
Thank you very, very much, Luisa. I'm going to stop your final reflections, and maybe they can come up if we get to the discussion, but I want to give Rich a chance also to give his presentation, and then we can go to questions. This is a very amazing account of your three big campaigns that you're focusing on, and the work of the Comité. And of course, the reality of the labor movement, especially among the maquiladoras that you're working with. Thank you for your work, and thank you for this, this wonderful presentation. And I want to invite Rich now to talk to us about the indigenous and autonomous movements in Mexico.
Thanks, Marianne, and thanks to all the organizers of this series. And thank you, Luisa, for those inspiring examples of worker struggle, and to Natasha for the excellent interpreting. I know how hard that is.
Yes.
I'm going to try to make a few connections to what Lisa was just talking about, because I think there are really some parallels between the independent struggles of labor organizing and the autonomous struggles of indigenous and other peoples in Mexico. So there are three things that I'm going to talk about this evening, if time permits. One is a little bit of background of autonomous movements in Mexico, with particular reference to the Zapatista movement, and also even beyond. The second subject is, what do these movements mean by autonomy? How do we understand this concept of autonomy? And the third thing that I'm going to talk about is, what can we learn from these lessons and apply them in our own lives and contexts here? So beginning with a little of the context of autonomous movements, I think most people know that the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, the EZLN, this movement of rebellion, broke out publicly 30 years ago, almost exactly. On January 1st, 1994, they went public with their cry of "Ya basta," we've had enough, we're fed up. So this is the 30th anniversary of the movement that's still going strong, but it's the 40th anniversary of the movement, because they had been organizing for 10 years before they went public in 1994. And even before that, the Zapatista movement, this cry of autonomy, had been building up in some ways for 500 years, since the European invasion of the Americas, and everything that represented for indigenous people. But some of those contradictions and the plight of indigenous people were intensified. Indigenous and other poor people, working people, were intensified by the neoliberal or free market model of global capitalism that has been underway in Mexico, at least since the 1980s. And for the Zapatistas, this movement that broke out in the poor, remote state of Chiapas in southeast Mexico near the Guatemalan border, for the Zapatistas, the final straw that really sparked the rebellion was part of this neoliberal framework, the reform of the Mexican Constitution to privatize communal, peasant, and indigenous landholdings, to end the right of indigenous and peasant people to work and farm their land in an autonomous, in a way, self-sufficient manner. And so the Zapatistas described that as a kind of death sentence for their way of life. The rebellion that broke out in Chiapas had been, as I mentioned, brewing for some time. For decades, many of the poorest indigenous people, land poor or landless people in the state of Chiapas, had been fleeing from their lack of economic viability, being squeezed off the land, and also the abusive and corrupt local political authorities. And with nowhere to go, many of them went to what was called the agricultural frontier, the Lacandon jungle in the remote eastern part, sparsely populated, of the state of Chiapas. And since it was so remote, there was little reach of the official government there. And so those settlers, those internal migrants, refugees in a sense, had no choice but to develop their own modes of social organization and really their own self-government. So these communities had been practicing this for decades before the final cry of "Ya basta, we've had enough." The rebellion was not one to secede or break away from Mexico. They were not calling for the overthrow of the government. They weren't a traditional revolutionary vanguard organization that wanted to be the leader and tell everyone else how to do things, but rather they wanted to model and practice an alternative form of organization that they found more participatory, more democratic. They were not satisfied and are not satisfied with either reproducing the existing hierarchies of power or trying to reform them at the margins, but rather building entirely new societies and governing structures. And here I see some parallels with what Luisa was talking about. That is, the Zapatistas have rejected sellout politics and self-appointed manipulative leaders, the charros in the case of the unions, but there's a kind of parallel in many other contexts. And what the Zapatistas have practiced and called for is what they call resistance, by which they mean not armed resistance, but resistance by not taking handouts, by not allowing themselves to become dependent on a bad government that is attempting to co-opt and divide people. So Zapatistas, who are members of this autonomous movement, do not participate in government handout programs. They reject what they refer to as the bad government, just as the unions that Luisa was describing are rejecting bad unions. And they're simply building an alternative. So this rebellion was a wake-up call against injustice and exclusion, and the state of Chiapas is one of the poorest and most marginalized by many social indicators in Mexico, with a large portion of indigenous people living there. And so in the rebellion, what the Zapatistas have begun to do is build at the community level, and by community I mean mostly small indigenous villages of 50 to a few hundred people. So in these relatively isolated and scattered villages, they're building from within society their own alternative education systems, health systems that are autonomous of the official government, their own system of administration of justice, their own practices of agroecology, because from their perspective, the government hasn't done these things adequately, and they're not going to wait for the government. They are simply doing it themselves and not waiting for permission to do so. So that's kind of this example, the Zapatistas, but it's an example that has also inspired many other movements. The Zapatistas were not the first to use or embrace the concept of autonomous, and they certainly are not the last. And there's a lot of synergy between this movement and many other movements that have both predated the Zapatistas and that have come after, and they're not only indigenous movements. So for example, some years into their uprising, the Zapatistas issued what they call the Sixth Declaration of the Lacandon Jungle. And this declaration was an invitation to rebellion to everyone, whether you're in Chiapas, whether you're in Mexico, whether you're anywhere in the world, but rebellion by ignoring illegitimate authority and creating your own structures of empowerment, social and political practice. And this call was embraced at the national level across Mexico by the National Indigenous Congress, the CNI, which was itself a coalition of the 60+ indigenous groups all across Mexico that was inspired to form for the first time after the Zapatista rebellion. There had never been a national level kind of network of this sort. And so the National Indigenous Congress embraced the call for everyone to practice autonomy in their own places, whether it's an indigenous community or Ann Arbor or wherever people find themselves. I'll just briefly mention a few other examples, and there could be many others of this sort of inspiration. But others, even if they're not indigenous, don't live in Chiapas, et cetera, have been in solidarity with the Zapatistas, inspired by the Zapatistas, trying to practice some forms of autonomy just from the union movement, for instance, that we just heard about. The Mexican electrical workers have been very supportive of the Zapatista rebellion and provided logistical support in some of the gatherings with electricity and lighting and so forth. The Independent Teachers Union in the state of Oaxaca is another example that, you know, in one way or another had some kind of indirect inspiration. And in many cases, these other Zapatista-inspired or self-inspired autonomous movements have also been in the forefront of fighting against some of the most egregious mega projects of global capital, the extractive industries that are ravaging not just Mexico, but Latin America and many other parts of the world. So for instance, in the state of Oaxaca, the so-called Trans-Isthmian Corridor, with a high-speed rail line, deep water ports, just enormous large-scale projects displacing indigenous communities, displacing peasant communities from their lands. And the inspiration of autonomy has been an important sort of glue for helping people think of a way to come together and resist such mega projects. Another prominent example of autonomy in Mexico was the community of Cherán, a Purépecha indigenous community in the state of Michoacán, in the west central part of the country, where the community was mostly indigenous in origin, but not particularly self-identified. Many had lost their original language. But there came a time when illegal logging poachers came into the pine forests that were the livelihood and habitat of that community and started to come in with big logging trucks and extract the resource. And the community rose up and organized to resist that, only to discover that the logging companies were backed by the drug cartels, the transnational criminal organizations, which in turn enjoyed the complicity, if not the active support, of the government. So the community said, well, we can't turn to anyone else for help but ourselves. And they began to organize. In the process of organizing, they succeeded. They declared autonomy. They threw out all of these predatory forces and created structures to govern themselves and also to sort of re-identify as Purépecha indigenous people, rediscover their cultural roots. There are many, many other examples that I won't go into now across Mexico and other parts of Latin America. We can talk about it more in the discussion. But even at a global level, the so-called alter globalization movement, some people call it anti-globalization, but it's really alter globalization. We're all part of the same globe, but it doesn't have to be a globe that is organized hierarchically and vertically to disempower people. So the World Social Forums, for instance, that have suggested alternative models under the slogan, "Another world is possible." The major 1999 uprising in Seattle against the World Trade Organization meeting, where all kinds of groups, environmental groups, indigenous groups, others from all over the world converged. It was a wake-up call, and they explicitly recognized the inspiration of the Zapatistas and other autonomous movements. The Rojava movement in Kurdistan, the Occupy movement in the United States and elsewhere. So those are all a few sort of examples of kind of the background of this growing concept and practice of autonomy, of which the Zapatistas are only one prominent example. Take a sip of water. The second subject I wanted to go into a little bit is, what exactly do these movements mean by autonomy? And I should say that they don't all mean the same thing, but that's fine. There's a kind of autonomy of autonomies, freedom to organize autonomously in whatever way people see fit. That's kind of the idea of autonomy. So one of the things that these movements share is the idea of redefining power. And that is autonomy, not just as a kind of federalism. I mean, we have some separation of powers between the state level and the national level in the US government system, for example, but that's not what these movements mean. So it's not just carving out a space that's separate from the central power or replicating the structures of the national governing power, but it's creating something entirely new. To quote the African-American lesbian feminist poet Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So these autonomous movements are trying to create something new, a new way of doing politics, you might say. Why is this important? Well, I think we have the misconception often that politics is simply the electoral competition between political party elites, often using vote buying and other corrupt practices. And so understandably, there are a lot of people say, I hate politics. People reject politics because, yeah, they reject that politics. And that unfortunately creates sometimes a sort of anti-politics backlash, which can lead to military coups or right-wing populists of a sort that we've experienced recently in the United States. So redefining politics, I think, is an important contribution of these autonomy movements, and rejecting the idea that politics is simply electoral competition among political elites. There's a political theorist, Antonio Negri, who talks about the difference between constituent power and constituted power. So constituent power is the power that you make by doing at the grassroots. All the constituent parts of a society, through their participation, are empowering themselves, as opposed to the official constituted authority structures. And so in this sense, I think what the autonomy movements are doing is trying to redefine power, or a lot of feminist organizations, some that have also embraced the example and the inspiration of the Zapatista movement, the idea of empowerment rather than power, or power to do things as opposed to power over somebody else. So there's a big difference between power and force. In a recent interview, the insurgent subcommander Moises, an indigenous leader in the Zapatista movement, said, it's not necessary to conquer the world, it's enough to make it again, make it new again. So this is that different notion of power, not taking things by force, subduing someone else, but planting the seeds of empowerment from the grassroots. Let me give some more concrete examples, because some of that may sound a little abstract. In redefining politics, the Zapatistas actually called a referendum in the early years of their movement, and they asked people all across Mexico. They had their, supporters setting up balloting procedures everywhere. Not the official government, not the official ballot, but the question was, would you like us to, as a rebel movement, convert ourselves into a political party, or would you like us to continue to be in resistance against that form of politics? And among their supporters, there was overwhelming support for continuing to resist and rejecting that notion of politics as political parties. And of course, people in Mexico had the example of the 71-year reign of one political party that was quite self-serving and exclusionary. So political parties didn't have a great reputation, but it was all political parties, not just the PRI, the long-reigning sort of party state in Mexico, that people were kind of fed up with. When the Zapatistas launched what they called their other campaign and issued that sixth declaration of the Lacandon jungle that I mentioned in 2005, it was the year before the 2006 presidential election in Mexico. And the Zapatistas said, we're not calling on people to boycott the election exactly. We are just going to have our own campaign, which is not about candidates and not about, choosing between Tweedledum and Tweedledee. We are going to have a campaign around the country to have open forums and raise some issues that the candidates are not talking about. So reframing the agenda of politics. They held open-ended meetings that they called encuentros, encounters, no agenda. Come and participate in setting the agenda and have a discussion. Very different way that kind of the smoke-filled room politics are usually conducted. And in the last presidential election in Mexico in 2018, that was won by Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO by his initials. The Zapatistas and the National Indigenous Congress of Mexico announced the symbolic candidacy, and I use that term loosely, of an indigenous woman, a traditional healer, a Nahuatl woman from the state of Jalisco, Marichuy, as she was known by, in which, once again, she took to the campaign trail, not to say vote for me, but to say, let's talk about what are the local issues and struggles and the sources of oppression in people's lives. And that campaign of a sort was followed by a series of constituent assemblies among the indigenous communities in which the CNI led the creation of a national Council of Indigenous Government, a sort of parallel government of indigenous peoples. Again, not to play the game of the official government, but to say, let's talk about what are some alternative issues that indigenous people among themselves want to talk about and share with others. And so this model is a kind of, I would say, radical participatory democracy. And the idea of autonomy in this sense is to have an emancipatory and transformative everyday practice, a kind of direct democracy where people who engage in participatory assemblies, and sometimes those assemblies can go on, under a mango tree all day long because it's hard to reach consensus when you don't have an agenda and you don't have a single leader or a party. But it's a process rather than an outcome. So those processes, the idea is, even if it takes longer, it's more empowering for the participants. It makes people who have never considered themselves to be political actors have the opportunity to think about what it would mean if they were consulted on the questions they're never consulted on. So this sort of is the way that the Zapatistas and many other autonomy movements have gone about not emphasizing the outcomes, but emphasizing the process and the kind of transformative potential of autonomy on individuals and groups of people. So there are several different dimensions when people in these movements say that they are proclaiming autonomy. There's a kind of political dimension, which is self-governance, rejecting to varying degrees. The Zapatistas more completely rejecting, and others have kind of worked with or negotiated with the government, but basically building their own structures of government that are typically community-rooted and less hierarchical, more horizontal in their structure. And in the case of the Zapatistas, in their structures of local government, they have adopted some unusual principles. One is that all the participants, the governing authorities, are chosen in direct participatory assemblies, and they are sort of empowered to serve the community for very limited amounts of time, and then they go back to their communities. They're not paid. So it's a deprofessionalization of politics so that you don't have entrenched bureaucratic interests, or at least it's an attempt to avoid that. And those who are chosen by the community can also be removed in a community assembly and, sent packing. And if someone is serving in that role in the Zapatista self-governing structures, and it is considered a service rather than a power, again, not the power over, but the empowerment of people to serve in that way, then the rest of the community has to get together and decide, okay, who's going to tend their crops while they're away if it happens to be harvest season, who's going to make sure the animals are taken care of. So it becomes really a community investment. And it creates a very different kind of relationship between government, which isn't really the government in the sense that we think of it, and the rest of the community. So that's the political dimension, and in the case of the Zapatistas, an example of how that functions. The economic dimension is striving for a greater degree of self-sufficiency and trying to break free from some of the concentrating and disempowering capitalist structures of economics. So the Zapatistas engaged early on in their movement in what they call land recoveries, which their opponents prefer to call land invasions. But they said, well, historically, we were here long before European invaders and these illegitimate authorities empowered them to take this land. So this is our land. We are recovering this land, and we're going to use it for collective purposes to make sure that people can adequately feed themselves, sustain their customary way of life, rather than enrich themselves or enrich a few. So they created, kind of alternative economic models, collectives, different ways of using the commons without ownership in the private property sense of the word. And in that striving for self-sufficiency, they also threw out whatever government programs and officials were in these autonomous territories and recreated from scratch health, education, administration of justice, etc. And one of the positive benefits of that, even though it was a long, slow learning process for everyone, was that the learning process itself allowed many young people and many women who had never participated in positions in political roles before, or in that kind of structure of governance, had those opportunities. The justice system, for example, that they created rejected the punitive model of justice and embraced restorative justice. Many of the women in the communities in particular found this very refreshing, because if you throw the man in the family in jail, you're punishing the entire family. If you have a restorative system where that person is sort of, giving back to the community over time to make up for whatever they did, that's a gentler model. In the justice system, the new regulations that they agreed upon in their communities also rejected alcohol and drugs. So that the women in particular thought that was great. Some of the men were not so thrilled with that, but the rejection of alcohol drastically cut back on domestic violence and the pissing away of resources by the men in the families. So those are just a few examples of kind of the economic dimension of autonomy. And the cultural dimension, the Zapatistas initially tried to have some dialogue with the government, and they had a negotiation that eventually led to the signing of accords in 1996 called the San Andres Accords over what would be the first stage of recognition of autonomy, cultural autonomy. But the government had a very different idea of what that meant and didn't want the indigenous people to actually have rights in their own territories. And so the Zapatistas didn't wait for the government's permission. They said, okay, while we're negotiating, we're going to go ahead and take those rights that were already ours anyway and exercise autonomy in our territories. The example I mentioned of the movement in Cherán in the state of Michoacán also was kind of inspired by this idea of reinventing cultural identities in a way that empowered the community and allowed them to decide what their own identity is. Historically, Mexican governments have often co-opted indigenous leaders and sort of created this kind of notion that, okay, you can continue to exist and that's good for the tourist industry and we'll put you in a museum, essentially. But many indigenous people are kind of asserting a cultural autonomy and the right to define who they are and what their own rights are. The third topic that I wanted to briefly cover was, what does all this mean for us? What can we learn from this example of people who might seem very different and very far away, et cetera, and maybe many people in the mainstream media don't have an opportunity to read very much about some of these movements. So I'm going to mention three kinds of potential lessons from the autonomous experiences of Mexico and other parts of Latin America. One possible lesson is that the emperor has no clothes. That is the old parable of the emperor, that structures of power only exist if people accept them, if people allow themselves to be ruled by those structures. In a recent reorganization of their own self-government, the Zapatistas said, you know, we tried really hard to decentralize and we found that pyramids of power kept building up locally. And so we've dissolved those structures and we're now going to let the local communities govern themselves and freely form their own collectives of communities if they want. So it's hard to fight against the pyramidal structure or hierarchical structures of power. But the so-called powerful really only have power if we believe that they do. I'm reminded of one of my favorite sayings of Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian independence leader, who was asked, well, how did you defeat the most powerful global empire ever, the British Empire? And he said, well, it really wasn't so hard. We just started to organize, and first they ignore us, then they laugh at us, then they fight us, and then we win. So if you simply exercise the power that you know that you have, then really all the force of the authority structures is in the long run not going to be able to assert itself. We don't really have to accept the hierarchies and norms that have been handed down to us as inevitable. Another quotation along these lines, the great champion of neoliberal free market philosophy and politics, Margaret Thatcher of the United Kingdom, big buddy and fellow believer in that philosophy with Ronald Reagan, coined the acronym TINA, there is no alternative. It's a big lie that is used to hypnotize people. If you think there's no alternative, you'll never try to create an alternative. So it's sort of self-reproducing. I mean, if we think about it historically, human civilization has been around for 50 or 60,000 years, but states and global markets have only been around for a few hundred years. Now, these are structures that people have created, often badly, and maybe it's time to rethink. We need kind of a new imagination, imagining a different future or maybe multiple different futures. And here's where that slogan of the World Social Forum comes in, another world is possible. Or as the Zapatistas say, un mundo en donde quepan muchos mundos, a world where many worlds will fit. They don't even like to use the word diverse, or they prefer to talk about the pluriverse. So there's kind of a plurality, multiplicity of ways of existing simultaneously. So that's one kind of possible, maybe abstract, but those are some really concrete examples of what people can do and have done if they simply don't accept the notion that you can't do anything. Another possible lesson, inspiration from these movements, and maybe a reason why this tiny group of indigenous marginalized people in a remote corner of Mexico have had such a major impact, is the idea that we are the change that we've been waiting for. The Zapatistas built their autonomy without waiting for permission, and they were willing to talk about what the government had in mind, but they weren't willing to wait for permission from the government. And so, we might think about not waiting for an Obama or an AMLO or even a Zapatista Army of National Liberation to rescue us. We are all capable of making our own alternative futures. And, that may sound pie in the sky, but if we think at the beginning of the COVID pandemic recently, all these mutual aid groups started to pop up because the official structures weren't doing much for the most disempowered and poorest people. In the state of Oaxaca in Mexico, I mentioned the independent teachers movement, which rejected the kind of charro or official top-down co-opting form of union organization. And many of the teachers were rural indigenous teachers, actually, who took a leading role in that movement. And when the government cracked down with repression, saying we're the ones who have power, many of those in resistance formed a kind of commune in the capital city of the state, blocked off streets, and started to practice a kind of model of self-governance, mutual support that was maybe in some ways short-lived, but in other ways the example lives on, just like the Occupy movement that we've had here and elsewhere. It was a wake-up, it was an inspiration, or Standing Rock as a resistance against global capital and powerful states that want to suppress self-organization. And maybe a final provocative lesson that we can think about from these autonomous movements, and I'll end after this, is that capitalism is a dead end. Using the market to measure value is a really bizarre concept because it misses the real value of things like the environment, which isn't easily parceled out and commodified, although they try. Community and the value of community is another thing that doesn't get adequately measured by the yardsticks of the capitalist system. Culture and cultural identity and the bonds of a society. In Mexico and throughout Latin America and beyond, the global capitalist model is scrambling to extract from the earth the very last so-called natural resources to maximize profit regardless of the cost to communities, people, workers, etc. We are in the midst of a global climate crisis, but that's not slowing them down at all because this model is based on greed that knows no bounds. Many of the indigenous groups in Latin America have pioneered an interesting legal concept, which is the rights of nature, saying, well, what if Mother Nature were accorded rights and not just private corporations that can hide behind the anonymous shield of incorporation? It's an interesting concept, again, sort of inspired by these self-organizing efforts of, in this case, indigenous communities. Indigenous people represent about 6% of the world's population, but 1/3 of all those killed in environmental conflicts, usually at the behest of global capital or the states that are protecting global capital. They try to hide their hand in doing that, but 1/3 of all those killed in such conflicts are indigenous people. And 1/4 of all the attacks on environmental defenders in the most recent year where this was recorded, 3/4, I'm sorry, of those attacks occurred in Latin America, with Mexico topping the list of countries where anyone trying to defend the commons against private profit, ownership, and greed runs the risk of being assassinated. So in that sense, I think autonomy is a sort of project of life against these mega projects of death. We are kind of lulled by the fallacy of market choice that tells us, well, you know, the market has spoken, it's a marketplace of ideas, blah, blah, blah. All individuals supposedly can, well, vote with their dollars. But the problem is, of course, not all individuals have the same allocation of capital. And so it is a fallacy that has infected our political systems. The global version of free market capitalism that we're enduring in recent decades that goes under the framework of neoliberalism really robs us in many ways of our autonomy. Where are the decisions that affect our lives being made? In the boardrooms of transnational corporations, in the inner councils of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, in the national security apparatuses of the states that are using or subcontracting violence to enforce the private accumulation of wealth. This is not democratic, and it's not accountable, and it's not very good for people and other living things. So this is why the Zapatistas, to conclude, say that their model is anti-capitalist, and that they are organizing, as they put it, from below and to the left. So it is kind of like the example that Luisa was mentioning of the CFO of the workers' border organization, going door to door, starting from below, and one worker at a time, trying to change the world. So I'll stop with that, hopefully more inspiring possibility.
Rich, I hope you can hear the clapping. Thank you so much for, I mean, I feel very, very inspired, very, very inspired by you and how you have articulated. I didn't know what you would say tonight, and it's a beautiful vision that the Zapatistas have and others have been living, and you've brought it to us and articulated it so well and in such an organized way. Thank you. And I thank Luisa for her presentation. We are going to have some discussion. Before we do, I want to thank Natasha especially. I don't know how many of you have ever tried to interpret or have been in other spaces where interpretation was happening, but she is amazing and top-notch and very skilled and proficient. And she said yes to accompanying us this evening, and we really appreciate her. She's going to have to leave very shortly for another engagement, but we want to make sure that she knows that we are all very, very grateful for her presence with us tonight. Another gratitude is for everyone staying with us and in being so attentive. We usually wrap up before now, but we had two very compelling speakers. If anyone does have to leave, we understand completely, and please feel free. But if you can stay, we are going to have some discussion for the next 10 to 15 minutes. And so I'm going to, in that spirit, turn this over to Rebecca, who is going to choose from questions that people have. A few people have put them in the chat. You are welcome at any moment to, now that you've heard everything, to go ahead and put some questions in the chat if you'd like, if you have something burning to ask Luisa or Rich.
All right, well, we do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with one for you, Luisa. from Marianne. And she writes, listen, and it was also translated, I think, in the chat by Natasha before she left. So I'll read the English and maybe someone else could read the Spanish. Listening to Rich, how much is your labor work inspired by the autonomous indigenous movements? And how do the workers who are trying to organize themselves independently see the indigenous movements like the Zapatistas? And then the question is someone going to interpret what Luisa answers?
Oh, that's a very good question. Let's see how it goes. I might ask Rich to do this, interpret, since Natasha had to leave. If you would mind interpreting Luisa's answer for those who speak English. Okay, Luisa, do you want to go ahead?
Sí, creo que me gustaría juntar ambas preguntas o ambos comentarios, tanto el de Marianne como el de Natasha, porque creo que están muy relacionados. Y a pesar
I'd
de
like to
que
gather various questions because I think they're interconnected.
a pesar de que me gustaría decir que sí existe una influencia muy grande del zapatismo en las y los trabajadores, no es así.
But I would like to say that there is a large influence of the Zapatista men and women on the workers.
Quizás para quienes tenemos el conocimiento de estas luchas a grandes rasgos, es muy fácil identificar las similitudes.
Maybe to generalize about these struggles, we can see some similarities in broad terms.
Sin embargo, y muy tristemente, para las personas obreras, quizás es muy difícil hacer identificar qué cosas de cada lucha independiente o qué cosas de cada resistencia podrían tomar para su propio movimiento.
But unfortunately for many workers, it's difficult to identify what aspects of these struggles they can take for their own movements, incorporate into their own movements.
Sin embargo, creo que esa también es parte de la labor de las organizaciones que acompañamos a estos movimientos de personas trabajadoras.
But that's part of the work of those of us who are in these organizations that are accompanying working people.
Poder transmitir qué es lo que otros movimientos y qué es lo que otras personas en resistencia están haciendo, quizás sin tropicalizar, pero quizás aprender a aplicarlos dentro de cada contexto.
To transmit what other organizations, what others are doing, but without tropicalizing it, and to sort of make it adequate to a particular context, each particular context.
Y creo que finalmente para esta respuesta me gustaría tomar algo que dijo Richard en su presentación sobre Audre Lorde y esta idea de que no se puede derrumbar la casa del amo con las herramientas del amo y
I'd like to
que
pick up something that Rich cited from Audre Lorde, that you can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house.
Y que tristemente dentro del movimiento sindical todavía se usan las herramientas del amo para tratar de tirar esta casa del amo. Entonces, por eso hay muchos vicios todavía en tratar de hacer sindicatos independientes.
And sadly, within the union movement, there are a lot of unions that are still trying to use the old tools, and that's very limiting. They can't dismantle. There are a lot of vices that are kind of inherited from the old way of doing things.
Muchas gracias, Richard, por ayudarme con la traducción.
Thank you. And now there's a question from Janet for Rich. She asks, so many similar movements have been repressed with enough violence to cut them off, Occupy for one. Can you identify other factors besides the jungle that have prevented that in the case of the Zapatistas and others you mentioned?
That's a great question. In the case of the Zapatistas, I think the main defense has been Mexican and international civil society. and their quick and effective and massive mobilization. In the early days of the Zapatista uprising, the government's response was the traditional response of the so-called powerful, send in the military with guns blazing. And a number of indigenous people were killed in that Mexican military assault. But within 12 days, there was a ceasefire that was forced on the Mexican government because some of the largest demonstrations since the Mexican Revolution occurred in far-off Mexico City and other places where people said, wow, you can't just kill these people, these down-and-out people who are struggling for basic justice, at least talk to them. So I think solidarity is the short answer. And that solidarity initially was less organized and has become more organized. So I think that's been one thing. The Zapatistas also have resisted provocation, resisted the temptation to respond in kind, and have instead turned on a dime and said, okay, when we rose up, we were a rebellion, and yes, we carried arms. Mostly it was more guerrilla theater than a guerrilla movement, but we got your attention. And now we are a social movement, and we are going to concentrate within our communities in building autonomy rather than concentrating on falling into the trap of giving the government an excuse to try to exterminate the movement by force. So I think those are a few of the possible explanations.
Thank you, Rich. I don't think I see too many more questions. Do we, Rebecca?
There aren't more questions, but I just want to point out to people who haven't been looking at the chat that Jen posted a link to an article in Labor Notes about one of the organizing campaigns that Luisa talked about. So check that out if you want to read that article. And then Ricardo just posted an article that he wrote in July 1998. And that's in Spanish. So both of those are in the chat. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think it's great that Rich could answer Janet's question as he did with ending with that solidarity is the answer, because I think both of our presenters tonight gave us opportunities to be in solidarity with those who are struggling throughout the world, and in particular in Mexico, in the labor movement and in the autonomous movements. And that's what we are all about. The Latin America Caucus of Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice is we try to provide these spaces with such amazing content to educate ourselves and others so that we can be in solidarity in more concrete ways. And so with that, I again thank everyone for hanging in there all evening. And I want to remind you that our next presentation is Tuesday, February 13th. So really 1 month from today. And our speaker is Julie Bordorso. And she's from the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies at the University of California College of Law. And she's going to be talking about Guatemalan indigenous movements. I'm going to Guatemala on Thursday to be there for the inauguration of the new president, who is of a political party and is of this is not an autonomous government, but I think a lot of the Guatemalan people feel a lot of measured hope for what can happen there with this, at least what we think of, and presents himself as a progressive president. And I think they feel it's half a miracle that he's actually making it to Inauguration Day. So I will be very interested to hear more what Julie has to say. And so I invite you there, look at the ICPJ website to get all of the other in this presentations in this series. Do come back, and we thank you for coming again. Thanks everyone, especially our speakers.
I'm sorry to bust
Please.
in, but we do have a question, and we do have a few thumbs up for it. If we could just do this last one for Luisa.
Sure. It wasn't there when I started, so
no, it
sure.
popped in, but right after.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you. Go right ahead.
The question is for Luisa. What does she think of the U.S. Department of Labor calling for an investigation by the Mexican government of the Fujikura factory, blacklisting the former workers of VU manufacturing? And what other responses should we demand from the U.S. government to hold accountable VU manufacturing, which is here in Troy, Michigan?
Creo que es parte de la reflexión obligada que tenemos el compromiso de hacer, porque existen demasiadas limitantes dentro del mecanismo laboral de respuesta rápida del TEMEC.
This is a reflection that we all have to make because there are a lot of limitations within the rapid response mechanism of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement.
A pesar de que para algunos casos es una herramienta muy efectiva, en algunos casos, como el de VU, se queda muy corto.
Even though in some cases it's an effective mechanism, but in others, like the VU case, it falls far short.
Personalmente pienso que es parte de un proceso que se tiene que anclar de otras herramientas para ser más efectivo.
Personally, I think it has to be linked to other initiatives to be more effective.
Y definitivamente no es suficiente un llamado para iniciar una investigación por parte del gobierno mexicano, pero sí creo que es un paso necesario.
I personally think that a call for the Mexican government to initiate an investigation is insufficient, but it may be a necessary step.
Y probablemente lo que el gobierno de Estados Unidos podría hacer es ejercer presión para que la matriz de VU en Michigan tome parte de la responsabilidad por su contraparte aquí en México.
And probably one thing that the U.S. government could do would be to pressure the headquarters of the VU Corporation in Michigan so that its branch in Mexico would have to take responsibility for its actions.
Y creo que por último también quiero retomar otra vez algo que dijo Richard, es necesaria la solidaridad para poder tener varios puntos de presión. Si estamos viendo que el gobierno y las herramientas gubernamentales son insuficientes, se necesita solidaridad para llegar por otros lados.
And to reiterate something that Rich said, I think that solidarity is crucial. Government action is not enough. We also need to have solidarity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carl, for the question. Gracias, Luisa, por la respuesta. And thank you to Rich for double hitting tonight with helping with the interpretation. So see you all in February and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Muchas gracias.